Mary,
the Trinity.
guess what?
What?
Guess you guys have one really amazing person in common. You're all members of the Honorary Fan Club, and these are the honorary.
Oh my God, I am so delighted.
You're in a booth.
It's so nice to meet you.
Yeah, so you guys have to talk afterwards.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
I love your daughter. Likewise. Oh my gosh, now you guys have a place here.
Yeah.
That's so terrific. Oh, wonderful.
Wait, hang on. Let's get a photo of this meeting. You're not going to send it to Marissa.
Marissa is going to be
All
here.
your people. She might be coming.
She better be coming.
It's her fan club. It's her family club. Okay. So look.
Luis Martinez was in my office the other day, and he said, "Oh, I love her, and I love her parents."
They really want you.
Well, that's great. Keep working on it. Okay. All right. You're there and everywhere. No worries. Okay. Well, I'm not going anywhere, and I know where
That's a good thing, right?
That's a good thing. I've been hearing all about it. They're just wonderful. They've actually just moved to San Antonio. They have a place here now. They also have a place in Los Angeles. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And this will be fun. It'll be over. I mean, I think we could do like 3 hours. If we could.
Tom Brady said no.
Oh, Scoop's back there. Yeah. Yeah, so my right red toast. Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, the favorite is one.
Yeah.
name is Bergen Streetman, and I am the Assistant Director of Trinity University Press. Thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation about the history of women's sports in Title IX at Trinity University and the larger city of San Antonio. As a mission-driven, nonprofit cultural and educational publisher, Trinity University Press is committed to evolving an agenda of work that engages, questions, and brings us together for productive discussions, like the one we're going to see here today. Publishing books requires community support, and a new book, From the Sidelines to the Headlines, The Legacy of Women's Sports at Trinity University, would not be possible without the vision and generous support of the Trinity University Board of Visitors, Jennifer Zinn, and Rick and Peggy Kaplan in particular, as well as dozens of other individual donors, all of whom are acknowledged in the book. Thanks as well to President Beasley and Megan Mustaine, Mike Bacon and Celeste Mendoza and the Trinity Development Team, as well as Angela Bridenstine, Jacob Tingle, Doug Breckenridge, Trinity University Press publisher Tom Hayden, and the book's editor Stephanie Morris-Stevens, as well as many others who were critical in putting this project together. And especially I want to give thanks to the person who was the true force behind this book, without which it would not have happened, and that's author Betsy Haslett. Let's give her a round. This event celebrates the publication of From the Sidelines to the Headlines and is brought to you today by Trinity University Press, the Trinity Sports Management Program, Trinity's Department of Education, the Trinity Athletics Department, and the Trinity Lecturer and Visiting Scholar Fund and Academic Affairs. As you may have noticed, copies of the book are available at a table in the lobby, and please join us afterwards for a reception, and Betsy will be happy to sign your copy of the book for you. So again, thank you so much for coming, and it is my pleasure to hand everything off to Jacob Tingle, who's going to introduce our speakers. Jacob.
Bergen, thanks for setting the stage, and a massive thanks to everyone who is here today. As Bergen said, my name is Jacob Tingle. I'm a graduate of Trinity from 1995, and I'm the director of our sport management program. And it's my true joy to say a few words about From the Sidelines to the Headlines before turning it over to the people that you're actually here to hear. While the book is about, and much of the conversation during the panel will be about college sports or sports in general, it is important to frame the event in a bigger picture. As Title IX turned 50 last June, many of us celebrated the important milestone, both for sports and for society more broadly. At a time where Trinity University has a president, a provost, a chief counsel, and a vice president of student life who are all women, yeah. Today's conversation, and indeed the book, is a reminder that without Title IX, it is unlikely that any one of President Beasley, Provost Mustaine, Dr. Robertson, or Dr. Tynes would be in those positions of leadership, but certainly not all four of them. The leadership team at Trinity, and indeed the culture here, is a testament to how far American higher education has come in 50 years. But as you listen to the panelists, I know you will be reminded of how much more work there is to do, especially for those with intersecting marginalized identities. We cannot stop marching, we cannot stop speaking out, we cannot stop voting. While the road ahead is certainly smoother than the one we've all walked, there are many more miles to put in, for all of us to put in. But none of you came here to hear me talk today, so I'm going to conclude by saying it is my true joy to actually see this book in print, and mine is autographed already, so thank you for that. I am grateful to Trinity University Press for their stewardship of this important story. I'm grateful and thankful to Peggy Kokernot Kaplan for asking her important question in 2014, a simple, "Where are my statistics?" that launched this project. And lastly, I'm in awe of Betsy for taking the baton and running further with it than any of us thought possible. One last note, today's topic is about the impact on Title IX on sports. And of course, one lesson we all learn from playing sports is to be flexible and to be adaptable. And with that, we are fortunate that Elena Wells has stepped in and is going to be an excellent panelist. Jenny Carnes could not be here today due to health reasons. So again, thank you, Elena, for stepping in and letting us see the lessons from sports. Excuse me. Today's panel is being moderated by Mary Ullman Jaffet, the founder of Jaffet Media LLC. Mary has a long and storied career in the media and in the world of sports, which includes 20 years as the Senior Vice President for Communications and Community Engagement at San Antonio Sports. She's a Trinity alumna, a dear friend, and we are so lucky to have Mary facilitating today's conversation. With that, on behalf of Birch Bayh, Ron Calgard, Bob King, and so many other allies and accomplices, it is my pleasure to hand it off to Mary and to get the panel started. Thank you all.
All right. Thanks, Jacob. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and it's always exciting to be on campus for me. This is my home away from home, even all these many years later after having graduated from Trinity. So it's a real joy to be a part of this, and I couldn't have been more thrilled than to be invited to help moderate this panel, because this is an amazing book, and you're all going to enjoy it. If you haven't read it yet, you are going to love it. It is, so many things. So we'll get to it right away. Let me introduce our panelists, and I want to thank especially Dr. Beasley. Glad you're here. Thank you so very much for being here. It is wonderful to have a woman at the helm of this university. So you're going to hear a lot of girl power stuff today. But I will start with the person who really we would not be here had it not been for her absolutely miserable ability to stay retired. Betsy Gerhardt Passley is a 1977 Trinity journalism graduate and former varsity athlete, and Betsy was the first female sports writer at the San Antonio Light before entering corporate life, where she spent more than 3 decades in communications and marketing with manufacturing, technology, and financial services firms. After her retirement, más o menos, she joined this Trinity History Project and compiled the team's interviews and research into the book that we're all celebrating today. It represents a 153-year view of women's sports, not only at Trinity, but across the state and country in the eras before and after the game-changing legislation of Title IX. Betsy, glad you're here, of course. Next on our panel is Yanika Daniels. Yanika graduated from Trinity in 1996 with a degree in political science and was a member of Trinity's first national qualifying women's basketball team in 1995. Yeah. While at Trinity, she was an active campus participant, you're going to find out how active, in student groups and publications. And after Trinity, she founded a Montessori school and earned her law degree from Texas A&M. She currently provides legal consultation to small business owners. I may need to have a conversation with you. Yanika, we're glad you're here. And pinch hitting today is Elena Wells for Jenny Carnes. Jenny wanted me to let you know it was okay to tell everybody she's had COVID. She's got, we've all been through it. She's going through it right now. She's going to be fine. She's doing great. But Elena has graciously stepped in, and we're so glad to have you here. Elena currently serves as the Vice President of Event Development for San Antonio Sports and was recently appointed as the Executive Director of the NCAA Local Organizing Committee, where she will oversee the execution of the 2025 NCAA Men's Final Four, which is right around the corner. Elena joined San Antonio Sports as an intern in 2001. She was my intern, and as a lot of folks have reminded me, she was one of maybe 2 or 3 non-Trinity student interns I've ever had. So, and I think she's done pretty well for herself. She's risen through the ranks to play key roles in executing 6 NCAA men's and women's Final Fours in San Antonio, plus countless other major events in the city. She served as managing director for the 2018 Men's Final Four and 2021 Division I Women's Basketball Tournament and Final Four, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And so please welcome Elena Wells. Okay, well, just to kind of set the stage, let's just kind of talk about everybody's participation in school sports. So Betsy, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. When I was in high school, I went to a really large high school in Houston. I got to watch both my brothers run track on the boys' track team. Of course, there was no girls' track team, and so I did other things like debate and can't remember what else. I was really wanting to play sports, though. So when I lucked out,
Can
you hear me okay?
Can we push the mic a little closer to
Yeah.
you, and then they'll probably be able to boost it a little bit too.
Can y'all hear me okay now?
That's better.
Okay, I'll start over. Yeah, and I'll be quick. So anyway, I grew up in Houston. I went to a large high school and got to watch my brothers run track. But really, there was hardly anything. I think we had 2 sports, both of which I stunk at. And so I did debate and other things, and then I get to Trinity and find out that, golly, there's a softball team, and I can just walk on it, because this is right after Title IX passes. I arrive in 1973. Title IX passes in 72, and so Trinity was just on the forefront of setting up teams. But the best part, and that's really the genesis of this book, is I was a member of the very first women's track team at Trinity with Peggy Coconut Kaplan, who you'll meet here in a minute on video. And that was really a unique place to be. There were only 4 of us, and we actually qualified to go to state and things like that. But so there were a lot of inequities, you might say, but we were really happy to be playing. So I loved playing at Trinity and representing the school, as lousy as we might have been at the time.
That's great. Yanika, why don't you give us a little of your history?
So I
And again, pull that mic a
Yeah, let's
little
do that.
closer if you could.
I guess the way I came into sports when I was, I don't know, 11 or 12, started playing soccer, but in junior high I was a cheerleader, actually. And so my family moved. I moved from that school and got to the new school, the new junior high, and it was already past time to have tried out, and I was heartbroken. But then Coach DeBoard said, "Why don't you try volleyball?" And then I played volleyball, and then she said, "Well, why don't you try basketball? And why don't you try track?" So I sort of by fluke ended up sort of finding my passion, or it sort of found me, and then I went to DeSoto High School, and I was fortunate, I guess, in that at my high school, I didn't know anything really about Title IX at that time, but at my high school, the girls' team was prominent. Our boys' team was not, and we played. Our big rival was Duncanville High School, and I can't remember. The coach's name was Sandra, and Duncanville High School's coach, and she was just a well-known coach in the area, and they went to state every year, and so I was just fortunate enough to come from a high school environment where I didn't really understand the disparity as much, and it was actually not until I came to Trinity that I understood the disparity. But so I played varsity volleyball and basketball and ran track in high school, and basketball specifically changed my life.
I'm going to interrupt. Would you tell why you came to Trinity? What happened to get you to come to Trinity instead of another
yes.
option? I'm just curious.
So I was my senior year at DeSoto. It was the year that we were supposed to be Duncanville, and it was a big push. We thought that we were going to be able to go to state if we could make it past Duncanville, and I actually tore my ACL the first day of practice, first drill of practice. But I had, at that point, I had been recruited by Yale, and so decided to not have surgery and play through the season with that torn ACL, trying to secure that scholarship. And got to the Duncanville game. And had the best game of my career and finished tearing my ACL in that game. So I made it to the Duncanville game, but got that phone call from Yale that night, saying, hey, sorry, we heard what happened, we're sorry, but you know what this means. And so I really was in a bad spot. I really didn't know what was gonna happen. And my coach, my wonderful high school coach, his name is Larry Goad, best teacher, I think, in the game. He knew Coach Mahu, and somehow they connected, and he let her know that I was, my academics were my priority, and that I was, a Division I caliber player, according to him. And they connected, and Coach Mahu recruited me and came to Trinity and visited and fell in love with the campus, and it turned out to be, everything worked out. So
You wouldn't be here.
I wouldn't be here if I hadn't torn my ACL. But yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you.
Glad. Go ahead, Elena.
Well, so my sports participation was very short and brief. I played volleyball in the 7th grade, and it's both started and stopped after that one season, due primarily to a lack of coordination and physical ability. But my participation didn't stop there. When I wasn't able to continue playing, I joined the team as a manager. And I stayed as a manager throughout junior high. And then when I got to high school, I had put my athletic aspirations aside and was just in general PE class. And the coach that I had in junior high had also just moved up to the high school level, and I happened to be in her PE class. And she pulled me aside and she said, "What are you doing here? You should be in athletics." I said, "Well, you remember when that didn't work out." She said, "No, you're a great manager and we'd love to have you on the team." And so I was the high school, the basketball manager at Judson High School. Throughout my career, I also went on to be the manager of the track and field team. And that really brought to me the opportunity to be part of a team and to really benefit from everything that sport has to offer. And not being an athlete, that meant a lot to me. And it actually changed the trajectory of my life. I went on to be a collegiate business manager for the track team at UTSA. I was on scholarship, so it put me through college. And then I'm here today because I took an internship with the Sports Commission and Mary. And 20 years later, I'm still involved in sport and just feel so fortunate for that opportunity.
Well, everybody's path is a little different. I never thought I'd be in sport as long as I have been, but it was, I went to work for the U.S. Olympic Festival, which was in San Antonio back in 93. Yeah, and thought it was a short-term gig and I'd be going back to the TV biz in LA, but met a guy that I'd gone to Trinity with, and 28 years later and 2 kids, here we are. So didn't go back to LA. But well, let's get into the meat of this. Just as a refresher for everyone, let me read you the life-changing verbiage from Title IX. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Nowhere in there does it say sports. But we all know that it had a profound effect on sports. So let's kind of just talk semantics first. Betsy, you literally wrote the book on this. So tell us the difference between equality and equity. Very distinct difference, yes?
Yes, and when my husband was reading, and he also asked me the same question, because I had to ask myself that question. I did a lot of search and replacing, because there really is a difference, and I'm gonna let Elena really kind of give a real-world example from San Antonio, but let me just throw a couple of quick sports analogies out. Men and women are obviously physically different, and so when we talk about equality, we talk about equality of opportunity, right? So can women play sports like basketball in a similar way that men can play? One of the accommodations, you might argue, for women in basketball is they do play with a slightly smaller ball. So that's kind of a numerical thing. I had a long conversation with a woman in the back here about equity is about numbers. And, I didn't think of it that way, but a smaller basketball is a numerical difference because our hands are a little bit smaller. Her conversation was also, well, we probably should also lower the basket, and I don't disagree with that. The other fun analogy, though, and I think Krista Potter's in here, but her dad and Libby Johnson both stood up co-ed intramurals here at Trinity in the 70s, and my husband and I had a blast participating in that because they knew that if you had a co-ed softball team and the men were allowed to hit from their normal side, they would be hitting the softball out of the park every time. What Jim Potter and Libby Johnson did is they kind of turned the tables and said, if you're a right-handed batter as a guy, you have to bat from the left side. And what that did was that created a form of equality, right? Because now you have a little bit more level playing field. There were other examples, like I think the battery had to be a male and a female. And what we found was that if we recruited the really good athletes, the guys on our team put their pride aside and were able to let us all participate equally, and we were very successful. So I would kind of call that another example, I think, of how equity, how we create an accommodation or rule to try to level that field, knowing that there's differences. But I think Elena and Jenny Carnes' experience with that 2021, I don't know how many of y'all remember, we had 64 teams come in during the COVID year in 2021. We were supposed to be sponsoring only 4 teams. In April of 2021, we ended up 3 weeks earlier bringing 64 teams times 35 people on each staff, so a couple of thousand people who had to be in their own bubbles. And I don't know if any of y'all remember Sedona Prince from Oregon posting a quick TikTok about what the weight room looked like. Well, that was Elena and Jenny's baby, literally. And so there was an aftermath in terms of how the NCAA responded. And I think Elena can talk to the kind of the equity idea, right? Sure. After that.
Yeah, so that all started with a viral video and a picture comparison of what the men's weight room in Indianapolis and their bubble looked like and what the accommodations that have been provided for the women here in San Antonio. And the NCAA's argument that they made at the time was that there was a limitation of space available in the convention center, and that they could not accommodate that until later rounds when fewer teams would be left in the tournament. That went on to showcase various other issues and differences between the two tournaments, from the memento bags that the athletes received, from the travel accommodation. There was a lot of stuff said about the food, which, and Betsy and a few of you in the room who served as our team hosts for the teams know that some of the teams were eating pretty well, and some were just dependent on where they went to school, so a lot of conversation around that. But really what that led to was the NCAA to take a lot of scrutiny, which that opened the eyes of a lot of people around the world. These conversations have been happening among women's basketball in the NCAA for years, and if you're kind of behind the scenes, everyone kind of knows these issues, but they brought it to the forefront and forced the NCAA to act. And so they hired a law firm and had that firm go through a gender equity review. It's called the Kaplan Report. So immediately after the tournament, they started to interview people, myself included, on what how it got to these disparities for the tournament and what the NCAA could do about that. And so that's where we are today. And as we approach even looking at what we're doing for the 2025 Men's Final Four and where we see the changes that they've made, they have, their response is kind of rooted in equality And they're still working towards how they can be more equitable in that. So they've changed the women's tournament from 64 teams to now 68 teams, so that it is equal to the size of the men's playing field in the tournament. The other thing that I think is most prominent, most recognizable, is the use of the March Madness brand. So that had been exclusively tied to the NCAA Men's Final Four, and through this report and this review, now the women are able to utilize that brand as well, which I think is really important because most people still equated the women's tournament with March Madness. And you didn't see a difference, but internally we were expressly told you cannot use this mark in describing the women's tournament. It is exclusively towards the men, so now that has changed. They have given equal budgets to the women's and men's staff at the NCAA. So when you think about that, it's a pretty big deal. They've increased the expenditures that they can make on the women's side and the staff. So the men's staff has 10 staff members, and the women's staff also has 10 staff members now. And they've also given them access to greater resources. The NCAA on the men's side uses a architecture firm that does all of their planning for the event. That firm has now been hired to handle the women's Final Four as well. So there's all of these things that they have done to directly address the report, and then there's still some things that they're trying to figure out. The report, one of the big recommendations of the report was to combine the sites of the men's and women's Final Four. But the committees have collectively agreed, both the men's and the women's committees, that they don't feel like that's the right thing for, in particular, the women's tournament and the women's Final Four, because they feel like it would be overshadowed in that same market. So they're still working through those opportunities.
So Elena, can we briefly, I know you're the moderator, so I apologize. So the weight room, that's what really sparked the
You
whole
wrote
issue.
the book. I mean,
And-
come on.
But we don't really need the exact same weight room for women as we do for men. So to me, that's an equity example, right? Okay, so we don't have to put the exact same weight room in because women are going to have different needs for their physical or for their sport or whatever.
Well, and if Jenny were up here as a former college basketball player, she would tell you that women don't lift weights in March. And so there was this whole issue of, do they need a weight room? And the coaches had collectively agreed that they didn't feel like they needed one at that time in the tournament. And so but when you're faced with that very visual example, the NCAA had to act. So we actually built a weight room in 24 hours. I was personally picking up the big balance balls and ordering resistance bands and borrowing treadmills and weight racks from Central Catholic High School and the YMCA, and going around to create this so that the next day the NCAA could showcase that for ESPN and everyone else. Now the result of that, it didn't get used because women didn't need a weight room, and by that point in the tournament.
Yeah.
So the officials and the coaching staffs got great workouts during the rest of the tournament, but the teams didn't use them during that time.
And I'm going to put on my PR director of the local organizing committee hat. And just to reiterate for everybody who may not understand it, the way it was set up in the first place had nothing to do with the local organizing committee. The local organizing committee was simply doing what the NCAA had instructed. So I had to answer that question an awful lot. Well, why didn't SALOT do it? Shouldn't they have done a better job? It's like, we take direction from the NCAA in circumstances like that. So that was really on the NCAA. Okay. Trust me, Elena and I could go on for hours and hours about that experience. It was transformative in many ways for us locally, but certainly for the NCAA. You had your own transformative event here at Trinity around Midnight Madness. Why don't you tell us that story? Because it's good.
Okay. So so this was, I guess, 92, 93. And so we had Midnight Madness to kick off the basketball season here at Trinity at that time. And I'm assuming that we still do. But I assumed that Midnight Madness was for everybody. So as Midnight Madness approached, which is it's a game like a scrimmage among the players on the men's team. It's at that time is what it was. And so as it got closer, and I started to realize that wait, we don't get to play. The women's team didn't get to participate.
Sorry.
I was shocked. So so Midnight Madness comes, and I was working in the Bell Center at that time, and I just decided that we both teams travel. We both spend the same amount of time traveling and practicing, and I still have to get my work done when we've missed class. I mean, I call it sweat equity. The sweat equity that I put in was equal to, and in some instances may have been greater than my male counterparts. And so I just couldn't stand the idea that we weren't going to be able to play in Midnight Madness. So in an act of, I don't know what the word would be, an expression of my disapproval. Midnight Madness, the night comes, and my teammates are, everyone's collecting in the Bell Center, and I usually shoot around after my shift at the Bell Center. So I just decided when I went to shoot and doing my regular routine, and the event is beginning to start, and I decided that, I'm going to stay on the court. And so as the guys start to come out, they're warming up, I'm warming up also, and it was all okay. I guess my expression of my disapproval, it was all okay until Coach Brock, the men's coach, came out and he's like, "Daniels, get off the court." And I knew he was, I could take it up until that point, but that seemed, he was serious. And so I did get off the court, but that was my way of expressing that as a player representing Trinity, putting in the same amount of time, there was no reason why the women's team should not have been participating in that kickoff. And it was the beginning of, I wrote a letter in the Trinitonian. It was just the beginning of my challenge to Bob King at the time, asking, why are things this way? And they absolutely should not be, and we really need to fix it. And he did. So.
Yeah, and you can see that letter on page 264 in your book. And Bob King was the new athletic director at the time, and he's still the athletic director at Trinity. And to his credit, he did change it the next year, right? Yeah.
And he responded in the Trinitonian.
Yeah. So it's always great to see strong young women speak up. So let's ask, was there a moment that you ever felt like your school really and truly responded to Title IX, or how did it respond? Betsy, let's take it from your era at Trinity.
And I think Thurman Atkins has joined us. He was in administration at the time. We talked about when Title IX passed, and we have a section only on Title IX because I had to learn a lot and try to understand that in 1972, even though the law was signed on June 23rd by Richard Nixon, it was really just those 37 words. And there was no really background in terms of regulations or what does this mean, for locker rooms or weight rooms or what coaching or whatever. And so when I was at Trinity, there really wasn't a moment, because I think there was a lot of conversation in the background by the athletic staff, what are we supposed to be doing, and the budget people, Durwood Hawthorne and others at Trinity, you know, we really didn't know yet. In 1975, there were finally some definitive regulations, and they had another 3 years. So I was really at Trinity during a very unsettled time where we just kind of did the best we could. We had a coach who was coaching 3 sports and also teaching several classes and not making more than a high school coach. We were sharing uniforms between the basketball and volleyball and softball teams, having to wash it ourselves when the men's football team had a laundry attendant and things like that. So we knew there was inequities, but one of the themes of this book, especially a lot of our interviews with folks from the Glademunt and the other eras of the 70s, well, we were just so happy to be playing. You know, it really wasn't that clear to us. I think it was in the offices where they knew they had to be working on something. But I'm going to pass it over to Yanika, but I want to start with saying that I think when I was going through this history, the moment was really the moment Yanika arrives. 1992, Ron Calgard had taken us out of this kind of a limbo where we didn't have a conference, men or women, put us into a Division III conference called the SCAC, which we are still in to this day. And it gave us a full Division III balanced academic experience without athletic scholarships, and was really the beginning of what I think the headlines part of our title is. So Yanika's timing was brilliant, by the way. Congratulations. and I don't know if, though, when you were in high school or if you ever felt like there was a turning point.
Yeah, as I've said before, I was unaware because of the context that I came from at my high school. And so in high school, I didn't really experience that type of disparity. Our coach was great. He took great care of us. We had a trainer. Our coach washed our uniforms and put them in our lockers. So he had daughters, and I think I didn't know that it was that way in high school, and it really wasn't until I came to Trinity and understood how it works maybe how it was working in the real world outside of my high school. But again, it was Bob King's response, and I must say, as difficult as a time that was, I'm really grateful that Trinity was an environment where you could have that type of discourse. The fact that I could sort of go through the process and write a letter in the Trinitonian and there be, I guess, some structure and a welcoming to have that sort of discourse, to me was also very important. And the freedom to do that, the freedom to dissent was very important. So even though things weren't the way they should be, the fact that Trinity was an environment where you could dissent and you could reason and say, hey, this is not okay, and there was an appropriate response, I think is very important. So,
Lainey, I know you've managed a lot of teams and you manage a really large one right now, but did you see the disparities? You're much younger than, you were way past the execution of Title IX in '72.
And I think I benefited from it, being kind of right in the middle. But when I was in high school, the late 90s into college, early 2000s, it wasn't a question I was asking because I had grown up in an environment where it had always existed. And so, it wasn't even something that you were made to know about. Even in high school, I went to Judson High School, which is a predominantly football-focused school. I felt like we still had all the resources that we needed as being on the girls' teams. And then when I look at UTSA, their athletic department wasn't established until 1981. And so that athletic department, since its inception, had always operated under Title IX and having to follow those guidelines. And, as a manager for a men's and women's track team, there were no differences in how we operated. We were just really low budget overall. So we were, scrimping to get the uniforms that we needed across the board and the equipment that we needed. So I think I really benefited from Title IX, from the work that you did and everyone else, so that I wouldn't have to know that there was a difference.
Yeah. I think, go ahead, Yanika.
as she was talking, you know, thinking back, I think one of the things that I'm realizing, you know, in this discussion though, is that what we didn't have and what I had accepted as just the way things are is there was nowhere to go after college. So in that sense, I knew that I had to. I knew that there was going to be the end of the road. You know, that college was going to be the stopping point because there was no pursuit of anything after that. And so I do think that piece of that disparity and you know, all of my role models at that time, you know, were males. And I will say that at some point after college, because males had been my role models, because there was nothing for women after that, I had to like reshape even the way I carried myself, because I was mimicking male mannerisms and behavior as an athlete, because those were the people that was what was in front of me to see. So even though I didn't feel any disparity in that sense in high school, the idea that there was nowhere for women to go after college, and we just kind of accepted that. I think there's something to be said about that.
I think, though the law was enacted in '72, it's still playing out, right? I mean, I can remember being in middle school and playing 3-on-3 half-court basketball. And then the next year, I don't even remember what year it would have been, but miraculously, young women had the capacity to travel the entire court back and forth. It was a miracle. But it just seems so, I mean, that's just a tangible thing that sticks in my head from way back when. Trust me, my career was over by 8th grade in basketball anyway. My next question is about how sports has helped you in your career, in your life, your relationships. At San Antonio Sports, we often talk about the power of sport. That's something we want to explore. But I'd like to play a video, Jacob, from Peggy Coconut, who was the inspiration for this book.
I wish I could be there with you in person, but I am in spirit. Sports, in particular, running and racing, really changed my life. With the passage of Title IX and with the encouragement from Trinity Hall of Fame recipient Shirley Rushing, I went from being an observer to being a participant, and for the very first time in my life, I experienced the thrill of competition. After graduating, I was one of 3 women selected to carry the torch into the opening ceremonies of the National Women's Conference in 1977 in Houston. And it was a chance meeting there that I met a world record holder, Jacqueline Hansen, in the marathon. And I became keenly aware after speaking with her of the disparity of women's distance running in the Olympics. And that was something she and others fought to change. And after they sued the IOC and won, I feel like the doors were opened again for me and many other women to start competing in distance races. And in this case, it was the marathon. And after we qualified, we were given the honor of being able to compete in the first women's Olympic trial marathon in 1984.
Yeah, and if you're from San Antonio or been in this market for a long time, that is the Peggy Coconut who used to host PM Magazine on Channel 12 many, many years ago. She's a remarkable person, incredible impact. Betsy, you spent some time with her, yeah?
Yeah, well, we actually, and there's a few of the folks still here in the room, those are still upright and breathing, but we used to run in a group together when I was a student back in the 70s with a lot of professors and ministers. And one of the things Peggy mentioned to me was, first of all, you know, she was the catalyst behind that first track team that Shirley Rushing got us. You know, Shirley literally stopped Peggy on the track and said, hey, Title IX is passed, I think you should go start a track team. But she was a senior, and so when she gets out and she ends up winning the Houston Marathon and getting asked to run with this torch in '77, she mentioned that that was the beginning of her broadcast career. Because the Houston network stations asked if she would do like a fitness piece on their news. And then she ends up getting signed to do the PM Magazine, which was a syndicated weekday evening show. And that's how she ended up in Ohio with PM Magazine. So that was a great example of somebody or sport, and she'd never run in her life before or really competed in any sport. She was obviously very talented, and it really changed her life.
So how has sport changed your life? Any one of you, just jump on in.
And it's impacted I can honestly say every aspect of my life, and it's an integral part of who I am. I guess some examples that come to mind are just initially, for me, I played volleyball, which I love, and I ran track, but basketball for me, in the context of how I grew up, and there was just a lot of unpredictability in my life growing up, and I always say that that basketball was so important for me because it was the predictability of if I bounce the ball, it's going to come right back up in my hand, and it was predictable. If I bounce it this way, it'll come back this way. I'm going to try not to cry, but I needed that, and it kept me out of a lot of trouble. I have no idea where I would be right now if I wasn't in love with the gym and shooting and just the sport. And writing about that and how basketball, sport in general, but basketball in particular, sort of impacted and changed my life. That was what the topic that I wrote about for my essay to apply to law school. I mean, it was that important to me, and articulating that, I got back feedback from admissions that just that story was impactful for people, and then as I shared before that I came into Trinity injured. I had reconstructive knee surgery, and Trinity brought me in, and I had the most wonderful trainer in Janet Brister, who was the trainer at that time, and I told her that, by the end of my first season, I never wanted to wear a brace again in my life. I wanted to be able to play unencumbered in the way I did before I was injured, and she took that and she worked me to get to that goal. And when I was working for that goal, I had a little mantra as the tears were falling. How bad do you want it, and how hard are you willing to work to get it? And as it was through the pain, that was my mantra: how bad do you want it? How hard are you willing to work to get it? And that's my daily mantra. Whatever it is, how badly do I want it, and how hard am I willing to work to get it? And I got that from sports.
Remarkable. Betsy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. And another reason I think Yannicka's time was one of those moments where we turned the corner was Janet Brister was really our first full-time athletic trainer for men and women. Up until then, we had Levi Knock-Knight, who was a wonderful man, but was basically there for the men. And so I'm really grateful. First of all, you went through a lot, obviously, with Janet, and I'm so grateful for that. But that was another example of if we hurt ourselves, we would get taped up in Libby Johnson's office in the Sam Center. So anyway, just different times, and yeah.
Elaine, I've been very fortunate to witness how sport has transformed your life, but share.
And even beyond I attribute it to where I am today, but I'm a first-generation college graduate. Without sport, I wouldn't, and it was not a given that I was going to go to college. I didn't know that. And without the scholarship that I received, I would have been, working to pay my way through, and I didn't even know what I wanted to do when I grew up. So having that opportunity to stay involved through a team and to develop a really strong work ethic that was then recognized by college coaches in the area, and primarily by a teammate. Her mom had told the coaches of the school that she was going to go to and play basketball that, you know, they should call me because they thought I could really help and I had something to offer. And so my freshman year I went to Lamar University, where I was a basketball manager there, and then came to UTSA after that, but still had that opportunity. And without it, I just know that I wouldn't be here today. So, you know, our mission with San Antonio Sports is to transform the community through the power of sport. And I think, you know, part of that is that work ethic, developing that work ethic, that sense of teamwork, and being able to carry it through your life however you're involved.
One quick comment. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't do sports, because I wouldn't have been running with Peggy and with Doug Brackenridge and kept that relationship literally over the last 50 years. So I'm so grateful that we kept that relationship and we're able to tell this story now. So thanks to sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's next. What do you guys see in the future? I mean, we've got really tangible stuff with what the NCAA, and we're going to look at the men's Final Four in San Antonio in 2025. The women's is coming in 2029. I can't believe I forgot that. So, I mean, so we'll see some very specific things there, but I'd like all of you to just kind of weigh in on what you see as obstacles, what can we anticipate, and in youth sports, I mean, that landscape is ever changing, right? So
I'm going to pass this, my epilogue. It's relatively short, and that kind of summarized what I was hearing and reading about what the challenges were. But we have two women here who have hands-on in a perspective on this, so I'm going to pass it to you guys.
So one of the things that we were talking about, the experience with the Women's Final Four in 2021, one of the things I put in my notes here to mention was the interesting thing about the disparities that we all saw, in particular with the weight rooms, is that the women's staff, who was all women, and the committee made up of senior women administrators from universities all over the country, were provided communications about what would be happen. They also, but nobody recognized that there was going to be a disparity. So I think we still have some work to do, right? We've turned a corner, but that's where we still have the work to do, is in educating ourselves, people like me who didn't know that a time when there wasn't these opportunities, and to keep reminding ourselves that we need to pay attention to these issues is kind of prevalent to me, and seeing that they didn't recognize it, so we didn't recognize it. When we talk about participation in youth sports, and I think youth sports in general, I think we've come a long way in providing access, but there's still barriers to that, to getting to that access, and participation gaps. I think one of the other prominent things that I saw when looking at this is that, you know, before Title IX, 90% of coaches of women's teams or girls' teams were women. And after Title IX, it's 41%. And so really working to develop coaches that are female and that are leaders in the sport, in sports, to keep going, so that we have strong role models for our girls as they come up through the ranks is important.
So on the issue of youth sports, I think the future, where we're going, you have to look at where youth sports is, because that's where it all emanates from. And one of the things that we've discussed a bit is just the concern about the commercialization and the monetizing of youth sports. Three of my 4 children were, involved in sports. My daughter heavily involved in soccer, and my son's in basketball. And the landscape of youth sports is, I would say, is concerning. at this juncture. I think that all of the things that we talked about getting from sports and the character building and all of the things that are so valuable and that are supposed to be happening in youth sports because it's monetized to the degree it is at this point, that goes to the back burner, and competition for the sake of someone's, profit bottom line is really where we are in youth sports right now. And so the future, hopefully, as we were talking, people who care and people who are involved have to speak up and dialogue and protect the integrity of youth sports, because that foundation, all of that context is where high school and college and professional athletes come from. And if you look at what's happening in youth sports, it's concerning. So that's what I would say is.
Can I throw one more thing?
Sure,
And I
of
know
course.
we're running late, but there in the epilogue, I was really surprised when I ran across the statistic that a lot of my friends at work, were sending their kids through soccer, select soccer year round, regardless of the injuries, spending money, traveling all over creation, thinking their kid was going to get a scholarship and that was going to all pay off, right? And there's a detail that I uncovered which blew my mind, that of the kids who play high school sports, only 7% move on to college athletics, first of all, okay? 40% of that go to Division III. So the rest of those are the only ones who get a semblance of a scholarship, and only 2% of those people actually get any kind of athletic aid. The other thing this one Division III president brought up was that if you look at scholarships, the amount available, I think this is 2020, for academic scholarships was $50 billion. The amount available for athletic aid was $3.6 billion. So we're all chasing something with this thing in mind, not realizing that this could be a dead end and also maybe result in youth who don't like sports anymore because they've done it too much of it. So, yeah.
Well, those of us who are parents who've lived the select, and it is a mess. It is concerning, 100%. But we are going to get to some Q&A from our wonderful audience members here in just a little bit. But before we do, we have a special guest on video that if you have spent some time in San Antonio, you might just recognize.
My name is Lynn Hickey, and I'm the current Director of Athletics at Eastern Washington University. I have been working in sports and education for the past 50 years, 44 of those years directly in intercollegiate athletics. And so during the time that I was really starting my career was when Title IX was being implemented and was growing in this country. Title IX changed my life. It had tremendous impact on me. I'm a pre-Title IX student athlete, and so the opportunities that I had going to high school, secondary, and in college were really limited. I grew up in a time where in Oklahoma, girls played half-court basketball. The longest race you could run at a track meet was 440 yards. There was no Olympic women's basketball team. There were no college scholarships. And so as Title IX came in, it really opened up the doors for opportunities and experiences that I had never dreamed of. Never really had seen any women role models in leadership positions. And so once again, as this law was implemented, it gave me an opportunity to do some things that had never been in front of me as a young girl growing up. I had worked for 15 years at Texas A&M University and then had an opportunity to come to San Antonio. And my experiences with Title IX in the city of San Antonio were outstanding. The first thing that happened was that our president at UTSA, Dr. Romo, had the courage to hire a female AD. And at that time, I was the only Division I female AD in the state of Texas, which was an outstanding accomplishment for me. We also were able to grow the program at UTSA. We added women's sports, we added football, but was able to really build a collaboration with the entire city to build a major Division I program for the University of Texas at San Antonio. I think the other thing that was significant for me during my time in San Antonio were just the number of women leaders that I got to work with. For the first time in my career, I had people that I could look up to that were mentors to me that were female, both in city government, state government, and in the sports world in San Antonio. And that really helped to solidify my career and help give me confidence to continue to go forward. Our country, and particularly the world of sports, has made great strides since Title IX was implemented, but we have a long ways to go. So I would really encourage everyone to not literally drop the ball, that we need to continue to be very intentional in making sure that there's equity, opportunity, and diversity in our sports world. I think an example was that in 1999, when I was hired at UTSA, I was the first Division I female athletic director in the state of Texas. At this day and time, that is still what is happening. The lady that took my place, Lisa Campos, is still the only Division I athletic director, female athletic director in the state of Texas. So great strides have been made, but we've got a ways to go. I think what is exciting about the future is that as we continue to be intentional about making sure there are opportunities for girls and women in sport, that at this point in time, we have so much more female leadership in the roles of being presidents, in being running businesses, in being significant leaders in the sports world, so that we have female leadership that can help push the Title IX objectives forward.
Lynn's a pretty remarkable person, and I'm very grateful to have known her during her time here. And I mean, she's still very, very, very much connected here, but I think those were pretty strong words and a good jumping off point for some Q&A. So just raise your hand and stand up. I think we're just going to shout it out. So we'll take a few questions, and then remember, we do have a reception afterwards, so we can continue the conversation there. Oh, see Jacob, he's so awesome. And Aaron's got one too. Okay, great.
Waiting, I'm going to make a quick point. When Lynn made that comment about being the only Division I AD in Texas, I looked it up. We have 25 Division I schools in Texas, so that gives you a sense of scale.
Anybody got a question? Okay, there we go.
One of the things that no one has mentioned, but it's certainly in the news and will be more apparent within the next few months, is that there's a tremendous inequality with regard to women's sports on television. Being a retired person who spends a lot of time watching sports and enjoys women's sports, I understand that ESPN is starting ESPNW.
I know it's there.
ESPNW has been around for
Yeah.
quite a while, but I think probably its access on through cable subscription and things is probably coming to light. The other thing I would say is, when you look at the contract of the women's NCAA Final Four on through the television contract through the tournament is through ESPN, and up until more recently, primarily those games were played on ESPN, but they've started to add that into ABC. So for the first time during our bubble tournament, they had games on ABC, so primetime network television, which is a great stride, and they've started to add more and more games there, but certainly have a lot more opportunities to do so.
And thank you for being a fan of women's sports. We appreciate it. Okay, other questions? This gentleman right here.
First of all, thanks for holding this, and congratulations to Betsy and everybody who brought this book about. Fantastic story. My question has to do with how much of this success story, if any, has to do with particular qualities of San Antonio. Could this have happened someplace else? Was it more easy for it to happen in San Antonio because of the way San Antonio is, or what?
If I can jump in, and if y'all want to add something, but Really, Art, thank you for the question. This is a story about Trinity being going down the right path at the right time. It's interesting to me to see that Trinity made this very intentional Division III decision because they did not want to pay their students to play sports. And it took a while for that to unfold, but and we did have a couple of speed bumps along the way. Doing away with men's scholarships in 1971 was extremely unpopular in a state where football scholarships were a big deal. The same year that we did away with Division I tennis, Southwestern University up the street made a very similar decision, which Glada Muntz also reminded me was also not very popular. But it put us in a position that we made this very difficult decision, so we were in place that when Ron Calgard in 1992 does renovate the center, build the South Campus fields, and provide us a conference for men and women, that really set the stage for men and women to be successful. So I would argue that, I know, and we have some San Antonio input here from Elena, but in general, Trinity, to me, the story here is that we had people who didn't want to pay athletes or students to play. We wanted them to be students balanced with athletics, but to leave with a good education and a good experience. And I just see this unfolding as a remarkable and a wonderful decision by Trinity. Now, UT made some different decisions. You know, in St. Mary's is Division II, so partial scholarships. UT, Incarnate Word are both full scholarship Division I teams. So I'm not sure it's a San Antonio thing as much as who are we as an educational institution, and where do we want to put our emphasis? Mm-hmm. So to me, it's really a Trinity story, and one of the reasons I really respect this institution.
Mm-hmm. I would say, regarding the NCAA event, the women's tournament, when things went awry, I think what San Antonio, our secret sauce is our collaborative nature. We tend to break down silos very, very quickly and can put decision makers around a table in a hurry, and that's what we did in that circumstance. We pulled the right people together and made some decisions and got things done. I don't know that that would probably could have happened in another city, but we're really good at it. And the folks at the NCAA, the U.S. Olympic Committee, other rights holders will often say that is why San Antonio is successful when it comes to attracting these major sporting events. So that's our little secret sauce. Another question. Okay, these are all guys asking questions. There you go.
Progression of women in the field. That is to say, I have a daughter who is an electrical engineer and is in a position of leadership at a major company, and she's in charge of diversity and trying to get more women, females, recognized and raised up. And so if we stop at the athletic discussion here, we're missing some of the other parts where women in leadership roles have to be raised as well.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point, and you can probably talk to some of the statistics about women in the impact of having played sport in women's success in the professional fields.
So there's a couple of interesting things, Dr. Plummer. I appreciate the question, and one is, even though we're still at a pretty small percentage in terms of women representing executives in a C-suite or a corporate suite at a company like an IBM or a USAA or whatever, is that of the few women who have made it to that very highest level in corporations, 94% of them played high school sports, and a little over 50% of them played college sports. And what we found was they learned teamwork and time management, a lot of those things that you're referring to. But even if women are not in sports, you're absolutely right, and we just don't have time. Sadly, and if we can do this right for the San Antonio Book Festival, I'd like to expand our conversation to the fact that Title IX was an education act. And so we went from a very tiny percentage of women who could actually be accepted in medical school or law school or engineering to now there's about 50% in almost all of those practices. So it's very much an education, well, and that would be your lens, obviously, but it's an education success story that happens to include athletics, and we're telling it through that lens because we had no representation in athletics really or in those other fields. The interesting thing is in 1972, even though the 37 words do not include sports, the immediate backlash was coming from the male athletic directors who saw their lucrative programs at risk. So this turned into a sports conversation really kind of by accident. So I'm happy to talk to you more about that, but I'm glad you didn't miss that point because it's a very critical one. And our new president, when I first met her, said to me, if we didn't have Title IX, I wouldn't be here. And I really appreciate that and welcome her.
Sure. One more question. There we go.
Question looking forward. Advice for parents of 5-year-old little girls in sports and how to direct them and what are the pitfalls they need to watch out for?
I do think that it depends on one thing it depends on is the sport, because from my experience and my understanding, different sports and youth sport behave differently right now. But I would say I think the pitfalls are trying to avoid the environment, the youth sports environment that has monetized things to a point that it just takes the integrity out of youth sport. I don't know how to describe it any better than that. I think participation, and we almost have to talk about, there are like two veins in youth sports. There's recreation, and then there's like extremely competitive youth sports. And if you have a 5-year-old, in my mind, I'm like, keep that 5-year-old in the vein where you can follow the child, and do they love the sport? Is this something that they really want to do? And until you have to transition over until that hyper competitive environment. But at this juncture, it's almost like you can't avoid it. At some point, you have to transition over in order to be perceived to be competitive for your high school team, for your club team. And so at this juncture, my 5-year-old would be sort of kept safe in the less competitive environments until you absolutely have to transition them over. What would you say?
I mean, I would agree with that. I think the lens I bring to it, I never had the opportunity to play youth sports, and maybe not from not having the access to it, just that my parents worked long hour jobs, and that wasn't something we did. And so I feel like I missed out on that early opportunity for development, and I don't know if that would have changed the trajectory of where I would be today. But with my own kids, I have 2 boys, one more athletically inclined than the other, but they both play sports. And to me, it's important that they're involved because of all the benefits that sports brings that we've talked about today. But really, it's important to me not to force that on them and not to put that pressure for them to perform. I have no aspirations that they're going to get a college scholarship to do that. I want them to have fun, and I want them to reap the benefits. And if they ever do go down that road, be as supportive as possible. Just make sure I'm not putting that pressure on them or trying to live vicariously through them or those kind of elements that I feel like a lot of pressure gets put on sports. And I go to flag football, Little League baseball, and there are some parents that are very serious. And being a parent that is not, you really recognize that. And sometimes I feel for those kids because it's fun.
Your child's not going to get a scholarship at the age of 7. So, yeah, relax. Well, thank you guys very much, all 3 of you, for being a part of this panel. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jacob.
All right. Can we give another round of applause here? Just got a few concluding thoughts. Before I do that, though, I want to, I guess, promote a couple of upcoming events that are in the city of San Antonio. One that you see here, and we have a handy QR code, so if you'd like to register for a table, you can do that right now. Or I'm sure Elena can help you do that. I believe we have Wanda Bingham and Emily Burr Foster are here. Is that correct? If we can, if they're here, can we stand? And
there's Emily.
Round of
Here's
applause
Wanda and Emily.
For two of our inductees. I imagine when we go for refreshments, they'll have some great stories to share also. So thank you both for being here. Also, we have in the city of San Antonio on April 5th. I cannot wait to go to this event myself. Becky Hammond is truly one of my heroes. So I encourage you to think about attending the evening with Becky Hammond on April 5th.
And some of the proceeds benefit San Antonio sports and its youth programs.
Perfect. So even more reason to go. Buy a ticket, and then if you don't want to go, give it to somebody else because you've helped donate to San Antonio sports. So we also have a QR code there, right? So we're happy to help you purchase those now. One other, just I guess a couple of things about the Hall of Fames. One, the San Antonio Sports Hall of Fame has more females that are being inducted this year than males. The Trinity University Athletics Hall of Fame in 2022, for the first time ever, had more female inductees than male inductees, 7 of the 9. So I think that is worth a round of applause.
Oh, good.
Oh, Shirley's here. Oh, hi, Shirley. Sorry. Hall of Fame 2022, Athletics Hall of Fame. So another Hall of Famer. Thank you, Shirley. Thanks. I'm gonna read something before I wrote a closing, and it's very short, but I'm gonna read something because this came out. I saw this on Deadspin that came literally as this panel was starting, and I think it's really important for us to hear this story, especially in the context of Yanika's closing comments and then the question about youth sports. So today, this happened last night. An Alabama youth girls basketball team, 5th graders, that was told that they would lose their practice facility unless they agreed to play in a boys' league, went on to win the whole league, and yet was denied the championship trophy. Instead, the trophies were given to the boys who, to be clear, were beaten by the girls in the championship game. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. So to recap, the girls' team was told they would lose their regular practice facility unless they played in a boys' league. The team did so, pardon my language, I'm quoting from the article, worked their asses off, won the boys' league, and were denied the championship, ostensibly for being girls. The male entitlement is staggering, and the remarkable lack of awareness in the lesson that teaches both young men and women. So this happened last night. This story is so important, and we cannot stop fighting. So I'm actually not going to read my closing remarks. Let's go drink some wine, and let's have some fun. Okay, thanks.
You're so good. You're so good.
Please join us in the lobby for refreshments and get your signed copy of the book. Thank you all for being here so much.
This is it.